Okay, so Andrew Killian will be our question asker, moderator, and such. And the funny thing is, I realize that there are many men here who would be good to also provide responses and stuff like that, but we can't put everybody up on the panel. So this is the speakers that we had today, and we're so grateful for everybody to be here and prepare to talk. I know that takes a lot of time and effort. Yeah, and if you have any questions, I mean, you can come and either shout them out at the end there, or if you want to write down something. I'm assuming that box is now empty, right?
I think so.
Okay, you weren't restricted to writing just one. So if any other ones come to mind, you can write it down on a paper pad that's back there with a pen, and then just run it up to him. But then we're going to know who is asking the question. So, can you hear me? Yep. All right. And everybody else, mic works.
Check, check.
Checking 1, 2.
All righty.
All right, first question. How can we cultivate a righteous hatred for sin, especially porn, without becoming embittered against women in general?
Why don't you ask the question one more time?
How can we cultivate a righteous hatred for sin, especially porn, without becoming embittered against women?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that bitterness that you might start to feel towards women is a way to avoid responsibility. When we recognize that our sin is our fault, it doesn't mean that there aren't outside factors that can tempt us, but cultivating a hatred for sin, I have found, which is one of the ways you cultivate a fear of God, one of the ways you learn to love the gospel more, is looking at what your sin deserves. One of the counsels that I've given to men struggling with this issue has been really meditate on passages that have to deal with the fires of hell. Because when we engage in this, we know our sin deserves an eternity in a lake of fire. That's what it means. And that to me helps you cultivate that, I hate this, because what it deserves is hell, and Christ took the wrath for me. And so I'm disrespecting Christ who took this for me, and I'm engaging in the very thing that sent him to the cross. And that's been one of the best things for me, to be able to do that.
Well, hatred for sin is essential. I met a guy once who tried to say that, God doesn't hate anything or anyone. And I'm looking through the passages of the Bible. No, God has a holy hatred, and so we ought to hate the things that God hates, just like love the things that God loves. There is a bitterness, an anger that can come up when we feel we live in a pornified culture. We live in a culture that is very just salacious and very in your face, and uses sex to sell everything under the sun. And it's not just always overt, gross sexuality. For both men and women, when you put a beautiful woman's face on something, our eyes are immediately attracted to it. And not just men, but women too, which is why it's such a, savvy marketing thing. But you have to when you see that kind of thing, whether she's modestly dressed or immodestly dressed, you have to see the bigger game going on here and realize look, somebody's made a decision to harness this thing it's a good thing within me, that I notice beauty, that I notice women, that I desire, just baked into our masculinity, that we desire beauty and we're attracted to beautiful women, and to not and to kind of just see look, somebody try to play a game, run a play on me here. They're trying to get me to buy something to give my attention, to give my strength. It says in Proverbs do not give your strength to women, and it's not meaning you should give your strength for one woman, but not every woman who passes by. You're not obligated to give your strength, your life force, your energy, your attention, your time, your money, to just any old woman. And I think what sometimes the pushback on this is guys want to be white knights. Michael Foster and Non-Tenant talk about this, about what's a white knight? White knights are those guys who want to, kind of be the male feminists and always just take the side of any woman on any claim she's making and always rush to defend her. So, I mean, it's kind of being a simp. It's like guys who have no chance with a woman, but they are, rushing to her aid because they want to play the good guy, the white knight. That's not helpful. We want to honor women, but we also have to realize like they are sinning, but you can't let that, maybe they're sinning, but you can't let that turn into just a despising and do this like men going their own way movement, which I haven't really run into that, but you have that in men who have just been burned. Maybe they've gone through rough divorces and things like that, and they really have just a general disrespect for women. So you have to see them like somebody brought up the I think Mike in your presentation, like you treat the younger women as sisters in Christ with all purity. I'm not saying it's a balancing act. I mean, it's just like it's the renewal of your mind. And so if you're directing your hatred of sin that you see, you hate it in yourself, but then you like lash out, and we do that in families too. Like we can find who, someone weaker than us, and then like start to like yell at them and blame them. And I know that I've unfortunately, have a temper sometimes, and I'm not being sanctified, and I yell at, the older child, and then he yells at the younger child, and they yell at the pet, that kind of thing. Like but it's a real thing, and that's one of those like terrifying things of fatherhood, that like you have so much power to bless or curse your family. So that's a rambly way of saying something, but I hope that was coherent.
Coherent. I think as the stronger vessel, there's a place for the emotion, but we have to know when to reel that in. And it sounds like if your sin is causing you to project your anger at the object, I guess you could say, you're becoming emotional. And I think that's when you get into your word and you make that logical, and you hide it in your heart, but it becomes this mental thing that you can rely on. I know what the Bible says. I know what my God instructs me to do. I'm going to let my emotions kind of like push those down, as we do sometimes, and I'm going to rely on the head knowledge. At least that's something that has worked for me. Maybe I'm heartless at times.
And I think something that I haven't personally experienced, but someday I will, God willing, is, like I said, in a few days or weeks here, I hope to have a baby girl. And I'm not a father of a daughter yet. But I'm a father of boys, and so I have a lot of compassion for them, and just dread, honestly, of knowing like how much I have struggled with the porn kind of thing and the lust over the years, and have achieved, by God's grace, victory. But I'd be lying to say I'm not still tempted, because the temptation itself is not the sin; it's how you respond to it. But I think that's another benefit of being a father to children of either sex. You understand that those young girls who are, not dressed well or whatever, you have to have some pity for them, because they probably weren't fathered well, and you don't want your own daughters to do that kind of thing. And I can only speak with that personally from speculation, but so several of you guys have daughters, and I think that you probably think along those lines.
Next question. How does a father draw a line between being firm with discipline and gentle with his children?
I mean, I only have one child, my baby girl, and we do discipline. And the way that we've disciplined is that, when there's clear defiance, and there is defiance, usually we're at home when it happens, so we don't have to worry. But if it was a public place, we never do it in public. But we make sure we go to her, we tell her what she did wrong. And again, this is, my daughter's not even 2 years old yet. We're building in habits for us and for her to understand, like, this was wrong. And then we do discipline, do Father, Son, Holy Spirit on the back side there. And sorry, that was a joke. And then right after, immediately, without hesitation, I say, I love you, and there's a hug, an embrace. The reason I think that matters is that when God disciplines us, he doesn't discipline us and then put us in a corner somewhere and withhold love from us. And I've seen how, even when I've had to discipline multiple times in a day, which has happened, the fact that immediately after I embrace my daughter and say, I love you, and what you did does not change how I feel. Now, my daughter doesn't fully understand what I'm saying. But what I'm doing is I'm planting seeds that matter to say, like, because I love you, I discipline you, and the love for you does not change. And I think now, of course, I think you should get on the floor with your kids and play with them and all that stuff. That helps with all this gentleness. Is that that's another reason why I don't recommend disciplining with your hands. I think a wooden spoon is better. Like, that was what my father said. My father said, I never wanted to discipline you with my hands, because when I put my hands out to you, I want you to feel like you can run and hug me. I'm not saying there isn't a place for that if you can't get one, but I'm saying as a general rule, it's best not to do that for this very issue. But the affirmation of love, knowing that you genuinely care, and be firm, like, you don't let them take an inch or a mile. It's just like, no, like, consistency is love to kids. Like, if one day you're disciplining for an issue and the next day it's not a big deal, like, it's a detriment to them. That is, in my mind, not loving. Like, you have to be consistent. And it's that consistent discipline and that consistent affirmation of love that I think is how you toe that line of being firm and yet gentle at the same time.
I mean, you don't want your kids to lead your home around, and I've seen this, like, the children set the tenor for the home, and that's not how that works. I mean, so I don't believe in, like, gentle parenting. I don't even know what the proper definition of. I hear people talk about that. This is something that your wives probably know more about, like, in terms of the mom kind of thing. But I think your goal is to represent Christ to your children, and Christ is not a pushover, but he is tender with those who, when people need tenderness, and he's very strict with those who need to be rebuked in the moment. And I certainly don't do it perfectly, but yeah, I mean, you just can't. You have to set standards and hold to those standards consistently, and let those standards be shaped by the Bible. Otherwise, I mean, go back to God's word, and I think if you're raising them with a full-orbed picture of who God is, then that should, the way that you are raising them in terms of your discipline should make sense to them when they're older. You can't necessarily reason with a little tyke. But I want to discipline in a way that I'm not angry. It's easier said than done. Because if you discipline when you're angry, then you say things you shouldn't say, and you may be physical in correction in ways that are untoward. But you want to be able to have a rational conversation with them later. And I always want to, like, talk it out, but you can't do that, again, with, like, the little kids, so you just have to, I've forgotten a lot of the things like that. I guess I'll figure it out again. But I don't know. I'm pleased with the way that God is shaping the boys that I have in terms of their character, and there's a lot of molding still to do. But I mean, a father's going to discipline, or a father's going to have certain ways of approaching the kids, especially like the boys, differently from the mom. And I think that as the boys get older, like, dad really needs to be the one to kind of hold the line very firmly and not let them push around or, emotionally manipulate your wife, because she's probably more subject to that emotional manipulation in some ways, being a woman. At the same time, you don't want your wife to be emotionally manipulative of your sons. So just have good, straightforward conversations all the time, with your wife to figure out. The one thing that we do not tolerate, well, there's many things we probably do not tolerate, but one thing we do not tolerate and discipline pretty harshly for is, and we've always told our kids this, is like, you may not play us against each other. You may not allow, you can't allow your kids to, like, go to mom for one thing, and if they don't like the answer that she gave, go to dad, and, like, unbeknownst to, like, you give different answers. That's really bad. Because the marital relationship has to take the first priority and be bonded together. And then, if that's good, first Christ, and then the husband and wife, and then if those are right, then you can discipline your kids correctly.
I would just quickly add, what we find helps is tapping each other out. Inevitably, one is more angry than the other at whatever the infraction was. So the one that's more level-headed should probably be the one that dishes out that punishment, so the other one can take a breath and not pummel the child.
I found this essential. Before disciplining, ask yourself if you're guilty of the same offense in any way. And once you figure that out, you can make peace if you have to, and then you can approach the situation in a much humbler way. That's been my experience.
All right. What do I do if my or my future wife's family of origin is seriously messed up? How will these circumstances affect my own marriage?
Did the question say if? I'm just
Yes.
kidding.
What do I do if my or my future wife's family of origin is seriously messed up? How will these circumstances affect my own marriage?
I'll flip that on its head, and that was sort of my experience. My wife was raised in a very good Christian home. My situation was a little different. So I entered into the relationship cognizant of my deficiencies. I was very careful to guard them and to work at promoting harmony based on what I espouse my own deficiencies as. It can be done. Yeah, it can be done successfully, again, as long as, in my opinion, there is a conscientious evaluation on one's part of, and that was my case as well. I said, okay, I got to be careful of this. I know what the propensities, what I would call generational sins that would come from my lineage could potentially do to harm the relationship. So we was very cautious of that.
I think I'm going to try and word this very carefully. We all know that sin affects all families. And depending on what the situation is, like, your families are going to affect your marriage in some capacity. That's inevitable. I think it's important foundationally to recognize that you have started a new family unit. That can be helpful. I assume the person asking this question is like, should I judge whether or not to marry this person based on, like, whether or not their family's messed up, which, by the way, that's a spectrum. So, like, I don't know what your spectrum would be, like, this is too messed up versus this is enough messed up that I can deal with. But the point is, you are cleaving to each other. So yes, it's not unimportant how messed up they are, because it is going to affect it, but try to keep in mind you are starting a new family unit. I think it's important that you recognize, depending on how big the sin is in each family, you have to have very curt conversations with your wife about, like, hey, are we comfortable going over there in this situation? Or we are not going to allow our children to be alone with this part of our family because of so-and-so. Like, you're going to have to be honest with each other and recognize, especially if you're going in a situation where you feel like your family isn't, maybe your family is messed up and your wife is expecting, like, certain affection from your family, and, like, she's not going to get it. You have to prepare her in a way that's going to protect her heart. Be like, hey, I wish things were different. This is the way it is. I'm here for you. Support each other. That's the thing is, like, one of your temptations is going to be to take your family side over hers, but that's not the way it is anymore. She's your wife. You honor your parents, but she's your wife. And if your family attacks your wife, that's no go. I'd be like, I love you guys, but absolutely not. That's not going to happen on my watch. This is my wife. You don't talk about her that way. I love you. That's never going to change, but like, this is my wife. We're one flesh, and she's not going to be treated that way. And again, this is a men's conference, so I think it's the same the other way, where it's like, support your husband, like, defend your husband, because, families, because they raised you, they often don't have the level of respect just because you got married, and they don't talk to you the way that sometimes they should. And just be ready to defend your spouse. Be like, you guys are in it together, your own family unit. It doesn't mean you disrespectfully punch back, but you have to be willing to defend each other. So that's the advice I would give.
Whether you come from a good family or not, a Christian family or not, or your spouse, I mean, there's just a lot of expectations that get carried in. Sometimes those things are very trivial or even humorous, silly, about the way that you say celebrate holidays, or what expectations are like for dinner time, or the foods you eat, or these things can be overcome. But like Tyra said, I mean, like, you're leaving and cleaving, you're starting your new home, and it's very important to draw some boundaries when you're establishing that. If you go ahead and get married, I don't think that as long as you're marrying someone who's strong in the Lord, like I think Kevin said, like a cord of 3 strands there, with God being the third in your marriage, you can overcome a lot of that, but you might have to put a lot of distance, emotional distance, and very, very intentionally, both of you may need to be able to do that, because that does cause a lot of strife in early marriage, navigating what it's like to deal with family drama or family, in-laws that you didn't have before. Sometimes it's really a blessing. I mean, my mom died when I was 18 years old, and then when I married my wife, I kind of got a mom back, and she's a great lady, and I love her. But it's challenging, and that's a good family, that my wife came from. But it's not my family, and not to say that my family is a standard either. I think it's very advisable when you first get married to live separately, away from, like, don't move in with your in-laws or with your own family. And it's very difficult to say that, because the financial situation, the housing situation is very challenging right now. But when we got married, we were 6 hours away from her family, and I was all the way across the country from my family. And the first few years, we lived far enough away that we could still visit a fair amount, but we had the distance that we're kind of it's just the two of us, and we had to figure out how to make new friends and find a church and go to, just rely on each other a lot more. And when you live very close or next door to, I don't think it's a bad thing to have a multi-generational home later on, if you need to invite mom and dad back in or something like that, or you take your family and you live under somebody's roof that's a relative. That's sometimes necessary, especially these days. But when you establish it, if you can get that distance, even if it's the next town over or another state away, that wouldn't be the worst thing for you, so that you really have that leaving and cleaving kind of thing. And then once you've established your relationship and made your own home path, then you can, that gives you more strength together, bonded to your wife, to navigate those hairy things, because we don't get to choose our family. We're born into our family, and sometimes those families are full of sins that you don't want to repeat. And when you identify it, like, if you come from if your parents were divorced, that's a serious thing that is going to probably scare you going into marriage, and that's so common anymore that I think a lot of people have to deal with that. And so we may make vows to ourselves or vows to our spouse that I will never do that. I will never repeat that sin generationally. I'm never gonna. It needs to draw this line in the sand. Like we need to do something new. So you just need God's mercy through all that.
What's the biblical way to date and later marry a godly woman? What does the progression leading to marriage look like?
That's $1 million question, isn't it? There's lots of different schools of thought, and a lot of that maybe just depends on your age and stage. If you're in high school, still living with your parents, I mean, first of all, you need to, if you're under your parents' house, then you need to defer to their guidance. If they don't think that it's advisable for you to, have a dating relationship, then you need to honor your father and mother in that, with their counsel on that. I think that if you're, out, you've gone to college, you're working or whatever, you're independent, that may be more reason to do the dating kind of situation. I'll tell you, like, when I was meeting my wife, I had heard about this courtship thing, and that's what her parents had raised her to want to see as a good model. And that has had waves of popularity, in the past few decades, but I mean, it used to be kind of, in many ways, either arranged way back in history, or even still in many societies today here on, modern, but not in necessarily modernized, westernized areas, but there are many places where arranged marriages are a thing, and you know what, it worked. But the courtship thing, as I understood it, kind of what we did was that it would be a determination if the person you're interested in is going to be a good spouse or not, and that you go through a very intentional, God-honoring way of getting to know them, like kind of like alongside the family, with especially like the guy coming into keeping open communication with her parents, and you're not going off on private dates, and you're pretty much seeing each other in view of the family. That worked out pretty well for us. That's what I wanted to do because I pursued dating relationships in the past, and it didn't work out very well. It led to sin, and so I wanted her parents' approval, and I wanted her parents to know what was going on, so I didn't mess things up. And I'm not saying that's the only way to go, but if you can do it that way, that's a good first start to try to like have both parents, assuming that both of your parents are Christians, the guys and the girls' parents. I mean, they should be in communication about this. They should try to get to know each other. That's my first thought. I think it was like a whole progression, but I'll start there, and then you guys can talk or tell your story about how you guys met or whatever.
Yeah, I just think if you date the way the world dates, you're gonna fail. So like what Andrew was saying, have the families involved, make it easier to have those barriers in place to avoid the sin that is gonna be knocking at your door. I can't say that my past has always been like that, but I do believe that's the right way, and that's how I plan to raise my daughters. So yeah, I think families should be involved, there should be supervision, and it should be a short courting, or if you want to call it dating period, into the marriage.
Yeah, the idea behind the courtship, was to try to avoid as much heart entanglement as possible, because you can be very disappointed, but if you kind of keep things less intimate, I said, and it's not my original thought, but like the level of intimacy between a guy and a girl needs to be correspondent to the level of commitment that you have. So if there's no particular commitment or no exclusivity between you and that girl, you just kind of get to know each other in friendship, group setting or something like that. You really don't have any commitment to her, but you have to guard your heart against, just like being this attachment, like, oh, you see this girl, she's beautiful, and you want to, you just want to commit yourself to her immediately. That's the way at least I was wired. And that could be very detrimental because you don't really have the commitment, so you can't enjoy the intimacy. What you're looking for is marriage, which is a good thing, but you have to have a lot of advisors, and you have to have some people who are going to, just remind you, like, look, somebody's gonna get hurt here if you're not very intentional about this, and you still might, be very disappointed or hurt. Life is hard, and you're gonna get hurt along the way. But the point is not to like you get hurt all the time and to go around hurting other people.
I guess I kind of use my story as a template. Again, I think, as has been said, there's lots of different schools of thought on this. I believe I called it a courtship, and I think there's a difference between there's lots of ways to same words having different definitions. So like there was a time when if you said you were dating someone, it could just mean, well, I went out on a date with so and so. It didn't mean you were boyfriend and girlfriend or anything like that. And so the way it worked with my wife was we had met. The second time we actually met in person was at my sister's rehearsal dinner, and it was clear that I was interested. Like, I won't go into all, if she's watching this, she's making sure I get the details right. But without getting into the nitty-gritty of the details, she had my phone number, we were corresponding back and forth, but no intentional thing had happened. We were just like texting once in a while. And at one point, the thing was she was about to go on like this missions trip for a while, and I didn't want to jump into a relationship before she left. I was like, just take your time. And I already had a past of like moving too quickly in the past, and so I was like, take your time, make sure you show you're interested, but don't rush this. And so, but one night, like, we're just talking, and the cat was out of the bag. Like, I wonder if this could be something potentially. And I said, oh, what are you doing Saturday night? So we went out on a date. It was amazing. We even got to share the gospel with somebody. And then she went away for the missions trip. And the whole time we were in communication, but we were not official or at all, just getting to know each other. Like, think you could be someone potentially. But as soon as she got back, I asked her father I said, hey, I would like to start courting your daughter. I think she has a lot of qualities that I could see myself marrying, and he gave me his blessing. I said, I care about your accountability. I want you involved in this. I asked my wife to be my girlfriend. 2 weeks after we started dating, I just felt led. I'm getting the engagement ring now, so I did. Matt remembers. In college, I was very excited about the whole thing. I think we dated for about 6 months, I think. But on New Year's Eve, I asked her father, I was like, hey, I've already bought the engagement ring. I've had it for a while, but I don't want to move forward without your blessing. And he grilled me with a lot of questions. Good questions. I will use those questions when a young man asks me for my daughter's hand too. And actually, I just feel like I got to tell this story. So he asked me do you have a secret child I don't know about? What about this? What about this? And it was all these sexual questions. And I thought, it was that's the fifth one. Maybe this will help. I'm a virgin. And he's like, oh, okay. I was like, and then they went off to other stuff. But that's something funny that him and I joke about. But
Your secret child.
yeah, I never thought anyone would ask me that, but he lived in Philadelphia, so he was and he was a pastor, so he's like, I know people hide stuff, so I want to know who's marrying my daughter. So I deeply respect him for that. But basically, yeah, and then I asked her to marry me, and I think I'm going to get in trouble if I don't remember this right. I think it was a 3-month engagement. To my memory, it was very short, because I was like, I don't want a long engagement, I want to get married. So that's what I did. I was trying to let the Bible guide me. I wanted accountability. I wanted her parents to be involved. My parents weren't really around, and they had a more laissez-faire attitude. And that's another thing you got to navigate too, is you want her parents as the man, you want to try to bridge that gap, especially if they're maybe they're unbelievers, maybe they don't care, but showing honor to them is a good witness anyways. Either it's an opportunity for you to be a Christian witness to them, and also no man, I guarantee you, no young man has treated them with that much respect. And if you want their blessing, that's one way that you can get it. To be like, oh, he doesn't have to ask me. From their perspective, like, he doesn't have to ask me this. He doesn't have to involve me in this, but he is. I've never met a young man like this. And like, that could be a great witness, and that's something you want to do. So I would say try to use the godly authorities in her life. Maybe that's a pastor as well, especially if the parents aren't believers as well. But you want to be respecting the natural authorities God has put in place, and you want accountability and intentionality, like it's already been said. So I don't know if that's helpful to anyone.
We're out of time, probably. Is it, you got one more? Okay.
This one's actually specifically addressed to Mike. What kinds of problems are you seeing among kids in schools resulting from porn on smartphones or sexting?
The sexting thing is a pretty big deal because these girls think that they're sending a picture to someone that cares about them, potentially for the long term, and it's not the case most times, or people are using that just to hurt someone, maybe kind of trick them so that you can then bully them in some sort of situation, which is terrible. Would you mind saying the first part of that again before the sexting?
What kind of problems are you seeing among kids in school resulting from porn on smartphones or sexting?
Yeah, the smartphones. So just overall with the phones, and hopefully the young guys here aren't experiencing this, these kids can't stay away from them. And I have students that come in and we're working on something that's for their graduation, and I say it's going to take this amount of time. Unless you get on your phone and you're texting, it's going to take this amount of time. And inevitably, they can't stay away. And that's just the TikTok type stuff. Now, I don't see the porn stuff, but I know that it's so accessible that it's causing problems for them. They're not sleeping at night, and then they're just getting, in my opinion, these addictions developing that are how do you say it? Bankrupting them, potentially spiritually, making a deeper and deeper hole for them to ever dig out of if they're going to come to saving knowledge of Christ.